I'm not yet totally comfortable with like the power hat that this role gives to me. And so I also am bringing like my own set of things happening on the inside, which are like, I don't want to say no. This organization does sound really cool. I already know how hard this role is and how hard those no's are, but I don't want to waste my time. I don't want to waste this person's time. I want to be upfront and honest. Like and all of those are feelings and things and like thoughts in my head too.
Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to be here today with a dear friend of mine, Andrea Bouch. Andrea, welcome to What the Fundraising.
Thanks so much. Long-time listener, first-time caller. So I'm excited to be here.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm so excited to dig in with you today. I feel like we've had so many conversations about fundraising and partnership building offline, and to get to do this with you on the show is really special. But why don't you first just tell everyone a little bit about you, your background in the sector, the work you're doing now, and sort of what brings you to our conversation.
Yeah. So I'll start with the current and then go back on the long winding road that was how I got here. So I currently head up social impact at DocuSign, which essentially is overseeing all of DocuSign.org. Under that are three core pillars around employee engagement through our programs like donation matching and volunteering globally with our employees around the world. Our strategic grant making, so our philanthropic pillar, and then the third piece is around products, so DocuSign for nonprofits, how we try to use product to drive efficiency in the nonprofit sector and the sector that serves nonprofits through DocuSign products. It was a very, whatever the opposite of linear is, very winding, curvy path to get here. So I have about 15 years like in and around social impact from a variety, I like to say, from like every angle. Started my first like big kid job at Google, very quickly realized that I personally needed to feel much closer to the impact of the work I was doing on a day-to-day basis. Took a fellowship with Kiva in Central America. That launched me kind of into the world of international development. I moved to Switzerland to get an MBA in nonprofit management and international development from an MBA program there. And then that kind of cracked open the world of social enterprise, public-private partnerships, impact investing. That was 2010, so very much at a time when the whole kind of sector was shifting and all of these new models were like really gaining a foothold. And then when I moved back to the Bay Area, where I'm from, ended up doing a bunch of different time at different organizations to really gain a lot of different perspectives. So I spent a little bit of time at an impact investor running their accelerator program, a bit of time at a philanthropy tech company running software for large funders, primarily foundations. Started my own social enterprises for a couple times, and then ended up as executive director of the nonprofit arm of a global student travel company, leading their kind of sustainable operations as a global company leading 10,000 students on trips to about 26 countries around the world, and doing quite a bit of fundraising through the nonprofit arm as well to fund projects alongside communities in those regions where we were traveling. And then ended up at Stripe working on people programs in HR during the pandemic. And now I'm at DocuSign.
So as everybody can hear, Andrea is a real slacker.
I like to sit back and cruise, Mallory.
She's really got a lot of chill.
No motivation to just get work done here. Tons of chill. Yeah. That's something I've never been accused of, is chilling.
Well, but I think like you and I, aligned and like became friends so fast for a lot of reasons, but I think both like driven by a lot of like underlying goals and kind of like problem solving motivation. So like both seeing the like individual challenges we were dealing with in our roles as fundraisers or nonprofit leaders, but then also sort of recognizing the like some of the systemic, not just inequity side of things, although we've talked about that a lot too, but just like some of the way things are always done that we like have been sort of pushing up against beyond our specific roles. Even before I sort of went, started doing what I do today. I think like there's so many things we could talk about today that would be interesting to nonprofit leaders. But I think as somebody who's been on the fundraising side of things and now on the sort of giving, grant making side of things, you offer, and not being so far away from the fundraising side, right? Like a lot of people start as fundraisers, then built, but we're not talking about 10, 20 years. Like it was only a few years ago that you were really thinking about, how do I raise money to sustain this organization? So I think you provide a really interesting lens to how we think about partnership building in ways that feel really good to everybody, with a lot of empathy for fundraisers and also the reality of what it means to be on the grant making side. So can we start though, like going back to your fundraising self, like when you were fundraising, just to kind of like level set with listeners, like what were some of the biggest challenges that you felt like you were facing? What were the parts of fundraising that you really hated? And then were there glimpses of things that you love and opportunities that you saw in partnership building on the fundraiser side?
Yeah, it certainly wasn't a part of the job that came naturally or easily to me. And it was a bit of a unique situation in that through the Rustic Pathways Foundation, which was the organization that I was leading, we basically were exclusively targeting our community of travelers and their families. Student travel companies out of the US in particular tend to work primarily with like fairly affluent families looking to send their teenagers on summer, spring break, and gap year programs. Rustic Pathways ran really, really incredible programs primarily at that time in pretty like remote locations. And so my job was to make sure that we were connecting really deeply with the communities where we were, trampling 10,000 students through every year, making sure that the communities really had not just a voice, but like a seat at the table as we thought about community service projects that the students were engaging in and what projects the foundation was fundraising specifically for. So an example of that is we worked in pretty like remote communities in Fiji, of which one of them for a number of years had been kind of flagging that a secondary school was like their biggest need. And to build a school and fund getting teachers, there's a lot of not only working with the local community, but with the government, with the Ministry of Education. And so our local team on the ground did quite a bit, years and years of work, kind of thinking and looking at the ways that we could potentially build a school, and then basically came to the foundation with a budget and said, we need X amount of money. And then the community goes and hires the local crews. And so in some ways we were a fundraiser, and in some ways we were like part implementing the programs as well through our local teams. But we were fundraising primarily from the families and the students. So the challenge there was you're speaking really differently. The message is quite different to a 16-year-old who just came off a trip to that community and saw firsthand the students waking up at 5 a.m. to walk the 8 miles to school every morning and like feels it very viscerally, but is 16 and maybe doesn't know how to, what to do with that interest. And so we were specifically looking at ways to like reach and empower students at that age through a very like, whatever the opposite of white savior is, like through a really healthy and community-led perspective to take that back home and like raise money. We had incredible stories of like, we had a student write a children's book based on his time in Fiji, publish it, and then raise like tens of thousands of dollars through selling his book to then give to the school. So like really powerful stories from that sense. And then the other side of it, which is where like the bigger checks came in, was directly through families. And so the story you're telling and the conversations you're having with families who maybe have sent a few of their kids through these trips, understand the value to the student, but then may have, private foundations or DAFs or other mechanisms through which they're looking for something that kind of directly connects with them. And so, those stories, it was much more about relationship building, giving them kind of menus of options, budgets within that. I actually like brought one of the families that ended up funding the building of a school in a different part of Fiji they went to Fiji. I went with them. The community, like there was this whole kind of like really deep, like the community met them. They were there to see the foundation of the school get built. And so like those types, like very, very heavy interactions and relationship building on that side. So I think it took me a while to like understand the differences and the different stories and how you find those areas that resonate, and then how you create the mechanisms through which all of those different people and stakeholders can like engage in the way that is best for them. That kid wanting to write that story, like the book, like loved it so much. Like I'm sure Henry is like going to be president someday. And then those families, in some ways I was like nervous about the idea of, family from the US wanting to go to the community, but trying to figure out how to do that in a way that like they really did that personal connection like more money came after that. And, that really understanding and leaning into that mechanism that was the way that they felt most connected and more willing and able. And, the desire to fund more was just like really powerful. But it took me a while to like understand the differences and then get comfortable in those differences and like lean in and let them kind of take a life of their own.
Okay. So you're hitting on something that actually I feel like is a little bit juicy and comes up a lot when I'm coaching fundraisers, which is this sort of translation of their work to different constituents. I think at first feels a little icky to them, or they're like, I feel like I'm being disingenuous because I'm like, they feel like they're giving it spin. And in my opinion, that comes down to sort of like the integrity and consciousness through which you're communicating things. So like if your only desire at the end of the day is money and what you're doing is like figuring out just how to tailor language so that somebody will give you money no matter what, then like, yeah, that's probably not going to feel so good. If what you're doing is helping translate work that's happening and not changing for the funder, but work that's happening in the way that it's happening with the values that are core to how it's happening. And what you're doing is helping to explain that to different types of funders based on their perspective and orientation to the work. And you're doing that to figure out, are we actually aligned? Not just, will you give me money at all costs? Then that change in language doesn't feel disingenuous or manipulative or like spin or anything. I'm curious sort of what you think about that and like if that played into any of your sort of working through of that piece.
And I think like one of the key differences there too is like, because I was working so directly with individuals, like the individual students or the individual families, like it is so emotionally driven. Like it is driven by their emotional connection to the project, to the outcome, to the end beneficiaries. And so I hear that. And I think I did feel that of like, does it feel gross or does it feel like spin? But it is the same tools that like marketing uses. Like you are going to reach and get, you're going to get a 16-year-old excited about something in a very different way than you are parents of a family looking for an interesting way to use their family foundation funding in a way that connects back to their kids somehow. And so it is spin, but it also is the nature of like it's storytelling from that perspective. But I'm going to say this and I might take it back later. I think that is in some ways so unique to like the individual donor or the family foundation where they maybe don't have, programmatic pillars that they're working off of. And I think now, like putting now my like funder hat on, I think one of the areas I struggle with organizations reaching out to DocuSign, to inquire about funding is the early spin that is like everybody wants to tell you they're aligned with your core focus. And so in that perspective, I think like there's a time and a place and like an honestness to the spin. And like, I am bound by the strategic focus, our funding priorities at DocuSign. And so it's not about the emotion for me. Like I can love the work that you're doing and I can not push through a grant, even though I oversee the grant funding. But the like individual donor relationship piece did feel really different. And it was the other part that like felt hard for me or weird for me was the real relationship building, like dinners. Fancy dinners with families to like get to know me and build trust felt like it didn't match to me. Like I know the end impact. I know the end goal. I know the impact we can have together if like, just trust me and come with me. But for them, building the trust with me as an individual was so critical for them to trust that I understood their, impact goals and the desire of their involvement and to trust the projects. And so you could feel them sort of like really needing that personal relationship with me. And so like meeting them where they were for like literally, I would like, make a longer layover if I was passing through the city where a family was to like grab lunch with them, which just, it's not in my nature. I'm not a schmoozer by nature. I want to kind of cut to the chase and, I think because I sort of like see the end vision, I'm like, just get on board with me. I promise I'm leading us in a good direction. But I think that was another hard part about it too for me. And I think I now understand the value of that so much, much better. That like true relationship to both really understand those desires and maybe say to them, like, I don't have anything for you right now, but I get what you're looking for. And then when I come back, they're like, oh, okay, there's like even more trust because I'm not just trying to push, any project that I have or any funding need that I have. And so I think that was like another important lesson that I learned, and like maturing and sort of leaning into that role a bit was the, the relationship part of it.
Okay. I love that you talked about how you kind of like brought in, like in your current role in DocuSign, what some of these things kind of feel like on the other end. And so we might ping pong back and forth a little bit here, because I think you hit on something that like I don't totally know always how to talk about, which is that, yes, which is like the intersection between our intention and our fundraising strategy. So alignment is like looking for alignment is a fundraising strategy, but without the intention of finding alignment, it can feel just as sort of shape-shifty or pushy or disingenuous as any other fundraising strategy, right? And so like looking for alignment can't just be about saying you're looking for alignment or writing an email that is like with that sort of alignment first methodology. I talk about this a lot in my book. It has to start with actually prioritizing both your own alignment, your alignment in yourself, your alignment in your organization, like what are you really like rooted in? And then actually caring about finding alignment in partners. And it sounds like you're sort of like hitting on that too in your sort of experience on the other side.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm a year into this role at DocuSign, and I will say I still feel kind of like I haven't quite found my footing in this. In some ways, I feel like I am both like I get daily outreach from organizations looking to, ask about funding and to, inquire about partnership. And I try to respond to all of them, and I try to do it in like as direct a way up front. I'm so conscientious of like not wasting people's time, not getting hopes up, not like disrespecting them in a no, not ignoring. Like I have been there. I have sent all of those emails. I have not gotten those responses, and I know how hard that is. But I also sometimes, I think I also didn't totally understand, like I'm a team of one. And so I have like, my days are packed. And for me to take the time to set up the call, to then have the conversation that like, so clearly there wasn't that alignment, also then feels like it kind of wasted all, like both of our time. And so it's like a hard, again, I'm like uncomfortable. I don't have the like right words because I still haven't like figured out. I don't just want to come out and say no. And I love learning about organizations and I love supporting in other ways. But I do think I feel the spin quite a lot. Sometimes I laugh that like everybody's connected to like our primary funding is around climate action. And like, I'll get outreach from like a local hospital who like, hey, we saw your focus in climate action and like us too. And I'm like, is it like, so I feel the spin all the time and like, I get it, but I think that I get the desire to show that you've done your research and you know what the organization, focuses their funding on, and kind of come to it with a little more of like, hey, we see you're doing this and we think we tie in here. But I do think some of it is like, feels a little, I don't know, like far reaching. And I think what I hadn't quite known when I was on the other side of the conversation was that the question really is like, what are your funding? I'd love to learn more about your funding priorities to see if any of my programs would potentially align. And I feel like a lot of the outreach I get is I'd love to tell you about my programs because I already know that they align. And I think that's where like the framing of it, and maybe I need to be better about figuring out how to like proactively convey sort of a couple clicks in from like what our website says about what we focus on. But I do feel like I have the same conversation kind of over and over and over again, which is that like, I love your work. I'm so inspired by what you do. If our employees want to engage with you through like volunteer efforts or through utilizing our matching donation program, that's very grassroots. It's led by employees. It kind of requires an employee to be excited about the organization and to kind of carve out a path there. But the majority of what folks most of the time are looking for is funding. And so I try to be as clear as possible kind of upfront, like these are our funding pillars. And like, because it's not the same as that individual donor or that family foundation, like I don't have wiggle room. Like I set those priorities and I'm being assessed against, me being able to show that that money that I am mobilizing is driving impact in those specific areas. And so the like us too piece doesn't work for me. I don't have the ability to take those on.
Okay. First of all, I just want to say, like, I appreciate how much like vulnerability you're having, like you're bringing to this conversation, because I actually think like this is a lot of the missing piece in how we as like social impact leaders, like navigate these like complicated situations together. And like, I think there are a lot of perceptions or beliefs about big companies, tech companies, funders, and what's possible if they just hear a little bit more about our mission. And so I think being really like having the opportunity to have some illumination of the reality, I think is actually really good for nonprofits, not to be discouraging, but to be like, hey, like your time is the most valuable thing. Like nobody wants to waste time. And so for nonprofit folks too, like being more critical in your analysis around alignment is really important. Something I teach inside Power Partners actually is in that outreach email, to sort of say like, here's where I think based on what was available on your website, alignment exists. What I'm not sure about is that I also noticed your focus on blank, 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 or the programs you fund really focus on X. That's not us. Like we achieve what seems to be our aligned shared goal based on this type of model. And so maybe that means we're not aligned at all, but I wanted to like put that in front of you in case I'm missing something about what you do care about, or see if there is an opportunity for us to have a conversation where I could learn more about, what it is that you're prioritizing and tell you a little bit more about ours. If it doesn't seem aligned, no problem. Just let me know. And I feel like that it's interesting because as I'm saying that, I'm like, I'm giving away on this call the strategy, but the intention behind that strategy will impact how you implement that strategy. So like back to my point before, right? Like your intention has to be to actually look for alignment, to use a template like that in a way that's going to feel good to everyone. But I'm curious, like what you even think about that, or I don't know.
Yeah, I can safely say that I've never gotten an outreach email like that. And it like, I guess hearing that, I feel like the way that I would sort of like respond to that, I feel like I already kind of come in a little more open to like, oh, cool, you've already sort of assessed that like the core isn't aligned, but that you have this other program that maybe I'm not aware if I go. And so it feels like there is sort of that like the additional layer of openness to saying like, I'm not totally sure. I did my homework, and if you're willing to chat, it would be cool to figure out if there are other places of alignment, which like it already kind of feels like it's coming from more of a place of curiosity. Just kind of hearing that framing. I think that more often what I get is, let me tell you how my organization or my program is going to help you achieve your impact goals through the paragraph that I read on your website. And I think that's a harder, I feel like it almost from like an emotional or like a visceral perspective, it feels like it already kind of puts me on the defense, because I already am like, I'm not sure that like whatever the thing is that I'm reading about, the organization's work, like I already sort of am like looking for the no, because it kind of, I don't know, maybe I just don't like to be like told what's what. But like, I think it opens, I guess, like the crux of that is like, I understand the work so deeply and I understand the role that fundraisers and like development folks are in. And so I feel the connection and emotion to that. And I think I kind of like, I know what's happening, but I also like, I think my wish is that it did come from a little more of a place of curiosity. And to be fair, I have had some of those conversations, but like, I'm curious, and like, maybe it's not funding, but maybe there is some other engagement. Maybe my HR team is running internship programs and the students that are going through your program could potentially engage in that, and I can make that introduction. Or maybe there is an employee that I know in that, in your region that is really passionate about that work, and I can make a connection there. And like all of those pieces of like, Then there's, an employee donation and a match option, or a volunteer opportunity that oftentimes comes with funding through volunteer rewards. Like there's other mechanisms to pull if we start the conversation from more of a place of like, let me learn about your work. Let me tell you about our work. And then let's like explore what the possible connection points are. I think that maybe like centering around more the like place of curiosity to initiate would be like a good starting point.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. So there's so much about what you just said that I think is so important. And that curiosity piece, and just what you said at the very beginning, like I already feel more open. So, I'm like a little bit obsessed with like what is happening inside the brains and bodies of fundraisers when they fundraise, and what creates connection, what holds us back from connection, and sort of like the relationship between fundraising and our nervous system. And so one of the things that's like, so that openness, that feeling of openness, right, is like your nervous system being at more ease. Like you don't feel like you need to go into fight, like protection mode. You don't need to like, end the engagement quickly because you're feeling this level of uncertainty around what do they really want. And like, it feels like, something is not really fully seeing me or allowing me to be fully known. Right? Carol Robin in the book Connect, Building Exceptional Relationships, talks about some of the core components of building connection, which is like letting yourself be fully known and creating space for the other person to be fully known, being vulnerable with each other, right? So those things like and curiosity is a part of that. Like letting somebody else be fully known does not mean you go in pretending to know them better than they know themselves, right? And so that curiosity, and that is a way that we demonstrate our own openness, and then kind of like co-regulate with the other person, who then is able to show up so much more open and curious. And so you're hitting on this like really kind of critical piece that then ties back into what I was saying before around that intention. Because if we're acting from a place of chronic stress and binary thinking, and I better get this funding or else, then like our email, we're going to express through the language and the urgency and even these tiny little changes in our communication. We're going to write that from a place of stress, which is not a place of connection and openness and curiosity. And then we are going to get like, this is how fundraising becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. I mean, it's like kind of funny too, Mallory, because like I know the crux of your work and the focus on like what's happening inside for fundraisers. And I've never actually like transferred that through to like what's happening inside for me as the other part of the person in that, proposed point of connection. And I think that like, there's like a human on that side too. And I also like to, obviously depending on the tone and like how, everything you just talked about, how that's coming through, the shift for me. And also like, I sort of mentioned this before too, but like, I'm not yet totally comfortable with like the power hat that this role gives to me. And so I also am bringing like my own set of things happening on the inside, which are like, I don't want to say no. This organization does sound really cool. I already know how hard this role is and how hard those no's are, but I don't want to waste my time. I don't want to waste this person's time. I want to be upfront and honest. Like and all of those are feelings and things and like thoughts in my head too, that I also am like bringing to my response. And how I think the one that always like makes me laugh, and maybe I've like been in the corporate world too long now, but my favorite is when they're like, I can do all of this for your impact goals. Let's chat tomorrow. What time works for you? And I'm like, tomorrow? It's so annoying, but I'm like, how about like next month? I'm like oftentimes. And so I think even that, like, there's a lot happening inside of me as well around like how I'm able to respond, show up, think about carving out that time to have that conversation, and how I can like effectively communicate the place that I'm coming from such that I can show up with more curiosity too, and not kind of on my heels or on the defense right off the bat. And so again, like I still feel like my conversations are awkward. I'll oftentimes like, if I take the call and then start off with being like, hey, I want to level set at the top here. Like, I think, I've researched your organization. It looks really cool. I don't think there's quite alignment on the funding side, but let me tell you about all of our different work, and let's explore if there are ways. And so like, so far, I think that's the place that like feels most authentic to me, that still allows me to show up with curiosity, but like level set at the top, that like, it's probably not going to be a check. And maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised, like, that they do have a program that I wasn't able to like learn about that does feel really aligned. And we do build that partnership piece. But that's how I've sort of tried in the times that don't feel like they're starting off that way to like turn it a little more into that so that I can sort of show up authentically true, setting expectations, but still curious, and kind of hopefully allow them to like also join me there. But if anybody else has cracked the nut, let me know, because it certainly doesn't feel graceful all the time.
I mean, I think that's also okay. Like I think even in these moments where you're showing like vulnerability and empathy for like their experience and like wanting to show that you care about the work that they're doing, and that care isn't always shown by doing something outside of the scope of your work, And I think there's this, but you deserve to be seen and have like your humanness included in the equation. And so anything that feels like it's not treating you that way or like acknowledging your experience, like, can we meet tomorrow? When I get those messages, I never respond. Like, I think that piece around like, can we meet tomorrow is like a perfect example, the tunnel vision that's created by chronic stress when we can really only see and act from the anxiety and the urgency that we feel. And we aren't applying any empathy to the message that we're sending, right? Like the goal of sending an email to set up a meeting is like, how can I make this action, and really designing any type of prompt, which that's what that email is, to inspire action from the person on the other side, is like, how do I motivate them to want to take this action? So being open, being curious, demonstrating some level of alignment that you've done your homework and you're not looking to waste their time. And that here's where you see some inspiring potential opportunity for connection that like increases motivation. The second part is like, make the action easy to do. And the moment you make it impossible to do by putting something on that, you like kill, no matter how much motivation, no matter how great the other things about your email might have been, if you make the action impossible to do because you really have not thought for a second about what the other person's reality might look like, the prompt's dead. So it's like, the way in which we incorporate empathy and everybody's human experience into every step of the process that we can only do if we are grounded and in touch with ourselves is like the foundation for funding.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think it can feel kind of silly and small, but it like shifts it makes me raise an eyebrow, or then it makes me feel like the thing I'm responding to is like, that timeline is unreasonable. And then I feel weird being like, I can't meet tomorrow, but I can meet in 2 months, or like whatever it is. It takes the focus away from the actual, like you said, the actual act or the actual like connection. I think it's funny too. I mean, this is sort of tangential, but like that aspect of trying to really like understand and show up with curiosity. I'm like remembering a conversation I was at a conference last year on like, for grant makers, and it was a lot of corporate grant makers. And there was a fundraiser from like a large global education organization sitting at my table. And she was lamenting how frustrating it is that companies all feel like they need to create a funding strategy for their philanthropy that's aligned with their business. And she was like, people need to just like open it up. These organizations know what's what. And like this whole, like every company needs something that's aligned with their work is like a waste of time on the whole sector. And I was like, this is so interesting because like, of course my work has to be aligned with the business. And like, of course it has to drive, like, this is a corporate job. Like my OKRs roll up to business goals. I have to show revenue growth where I can. I have to show, all of my programs are tied to like employee satisfaction and retention. And so I'm constantly analyzing, do my programs that yes, cost money, retain employees longer, recruit employees faster, recruit better talent, create a better sense of, create a better culture, create a stronger sense of connection within our employees, that value is there. Are my grants driving impact that is tied to something that the business cares about or that's connected to the business? And I think there is also sort of this like perception, and I probably am guilty of this too, that like these companies have all this money and like, what are we doing creating these like false strategies and this like false sense of like our funding needs to be aligned with the thing. And I just thought it was also such an interesting, like, oh, come hang out with me for a day and take a look at the questions that my leaders are asking me and that my OKRs are needing to roll up to, and that the metrics that I'm needing to like report out to like prove the value of these programs so that I like live another day, not to be dramatic. But I thought that also was like, I think that's where it kind of, I think ties, it's tangential, but it ties into this, like, is this a circle in a square peg in a circle? What is it? Like, are we trying to make something work that doesn't fit because you think that it's like the fact that I have to have this strategy is silly? Or are you like genuinely out there looking for folks that align with your, that is a part of their strategy? And I think that too is just sort of that like, like taking a beat to sort of understand like what's happening for other people, what's behind their strategies and decisions, and figuring out if there is like genuine, true alignment and partnership and curiosity. But I think, just because we were talking sort of at the small, like what's in that email and how are you setting up? But there's also sort of this like bigger, like this woman had been a fundraiser for 20 plus years. And I was like shocked that she was like, so frustrated that was the, these companies with their strategies. I was like, man, that's just like felt so misaligned and misunderstood.
Yes. Okay. So what you just said like really brings up for me the way in which scarcity mindset in the nonprofit sector leads to these beliefs about the correlation between money and power, which are not incorrect in a lot of fundraising relationships, that power comes with available resources. But because of our perception of that correlation, I think we treat the people on the other end of funding conversations as if they are not under stress themselves, as if they have a ton of power and access and unlimited resources and choice and autonomy. We make sort of like, we like apply all these beliefs that we hold about individuals who hold a lot of power and resources, and we start to apply them to all of the people on the other side of funding conversations. And we've really like conflated these things. And then we fall into this trap of a really unhealthy power dynamic, right? And that shuts down then an unhealthy power dynamic for the nonprofit and for the funder, and can set you up for a lot of like misalignment and sort of mission drift and lack of success if those things move forward. But then also like that's where the empathy and like the human get cut out of it, because somebody we perceive to have a lot of power, it's easy for us to be like, we don't need to have empathy for them. Like they have like, look at like, as opposed to being like, yeah, that is because we have a scarcity belief that the only thing of value is money. And so the closer proximity we have to money is more valuable and more powerful. And that is literally like breaking down how we build relationships in real ways.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't know that I have a whole lot to add there, but I think even just sort of like following through on, we had that conversation and then she was like, what do you focus on? And I was like, well, I don't want to, I'm going to like back out of the room slowly here. Like I have no desire to engage in that conversation at all, because I already know that you're critical of the fact that I have a strategic focus to my funding, and like it already kind of like shut it down. It's there certainly was not a whole lot of curiosity. It was like from a place of like frustration, sitting in a room of people with the perceived, holding the perceived power and purse strings. I think the other thing too that I maybe like misunderstood or didn't fully grasp in, especially in, like there's so many communities. Like I'm now in these rooms with like a whole bunch of other corporate foundation leaders, and I may not fund those types of organizations, but if we have like a really cool, inspiring conversation from a place of like curiosity where I got to sort of explore, and then I'm, 6 months later in a Slack channel or in a room with somebody saying like, hey, does anybody know any great orgs doing XYZ in XYZ region? Like for sure, I remember your organization, and for sure I've got it written down somewhere, and I'm going to like pass that along too. So I think there are also these like, it might not be the initial thing that you wanted. And I know at the end of the day, like it is money that moves this whole sector and that allows organizations to get their work done. And that's just like a reality of it. I wish it were otherwise. But I think too that like the connections and sort of the like secondary and tertiary outcomes that can happen from a really good initial genuine conversation are like not to be left off the table either. I think I've, even in like my short time in this role, I feel like I've reached out and gotten great, connections and leads from other folks and done the same as well. And so there's like that whole piece of it too, which is like, as you show up in I don't want to say healthy because it makes it sound, but like the more you show up with that like genuine interest and curiosity and authenticity to your work, the more I can then go and convey that out for you, on behalf of you to make that connection to other organizations that may have more alignment for, other opportunities of partnership.
Yeah, totally. Which like reinforces, I think, two really important points. One is that like something that was coming up before when you were talking about, some of these like emails and treatment is like, we are stewarding each other's donors, right? And like one of the things that I really fear with the rise of automation and AI and like digital, outreach strategies and tools is that we're just going to do more of the bad stuff faster. And we're going to have way more funders in that protective energy. And it's going to take a lot more to get people to be open and curious because they're now getting, like I had a call with a guy the other day and I didn't think about him as a funder because he was kind of like a friend of a friend, but he was like, I get 1,000 emails a day. He was like 1,000 emails a day. Like the fact that I ever responded to you ever was like, you're in. And it's just like, yeah. And like, we can't, expect like as the volume of things goes up and perhaps the like, I don't know, slash and burn fundraising strategies increase, it's like, it's going to get worse for all of us. And so like us being responsible in how we reach out, how we have meetings, how we create that space, it's good for us. I'm so glad you shared that story. That has happened to a number of people inside Power Partners. We have a case study of like one woman who went to a meeting with the CEO of a company to talk about corporate sponsorship, wasn't a fit at all, but his wife managed a portfolio of donor advised funds at the local community foundation. And he was just telling his wife about the work of the organization from their meeting. And she was like, I have a donor that is like exactly what they want to be funding. Right. And so it's like, oh my gosh, like this is like, we can be like leaning into like cooperation and connection instead of this like competition and like, burning things down as we go and like in our desperate plea for money. Yes, money makes it all go round. But if we are only focused on the money, then like, what are we doing anyways?
Yeah, I know. It's so true. And maybe it gets into questions of like, should fundraisers be, should compensation be tied to what they're bringing in? Because it like, that sense of urgency in it can mean that you're skipping over some of those pieces that can be so fundamental to, the relationship building with that family, to like bring it back to that conversation. Like if I was I was desperate to get the money. I really wanted to deliver for that community and get the money to build the school. But like those months of relationship building and my willingness to like, be like, yeah, okay, let's plan a trip, even though this feels weird. Like, the return was exponential. Like they came back for project after project after that. And so I do think like even in that anecdote that you just told, like if that fundraiser had come in so heavy with like, here's why I'm aligned and here's what I need from you, then probably that sense of curiosity wouldn't have happened and that CEO wouldn't have gone and then conveyed that on to his partner after. So yeah, I do. I mean, it all resonates and it's really complicated. Like these organizations need money to keep doing the work. Like we all know that that's true. And you and I talked about this when I was thinking about taking this job. Like I want to mobilize money in, from the tech sector as much as I can. And so I also am thinking about really strategic ways to like be creative and be innovative and change the model and, drive as much impact and create efficiencies in the sector and like break things and not just do things because it's how they have been done. And so I'm out there trying to kind of like shake things up as well. But there is like, the realities of the dynamic and the relationship are still there and they're difficult.
Yeah, totally. And they're impossible when we're stressed. Like we just cannot be
Yeah.
curious when we are in chronic stress and burnout. It's interesting. Somebody said, and one of these days I'll finally post this on LinkedIn, but somebody like tagged me in something on LinkedIn where they basically said like, Mallory, like you've dedicated your career to caring about like fundraiser well-being and burnout. And I've been like sitting with this comment a lot. And I was like, I like backed into that. Not that I haven't always cared about people and like how people are doing and that I don't have my own burnout story. But like when this became like such a bigger part of what I talk about was when I realized like, if we do not address that, then all of these strategies we're trying to implement, all of these things we're trying to do, all this money we're trying to raise, all this money we're trying to move, we can't do it. And so because our bodies are in self-preservation, protection, survival mode, we are not going to be curious. We are not going to be open. We are not going to be able to co-regulate in ways that feel good to fundraisers and funders. And so it's like, yes, I also care about well-being and burnout and all that because I care about humans and people and I love fundraisers, but also because we are wasting our time throwing more templates and tools and strategies at the giving crisis and not addressing the root cause.
Yeah. I am like for sure ignorant to like the fundraising strategies, but I think too around like the impact of a no, like that feels like it's like the visceral hit of like a rejection. And I'm like thinking back to an exchange I had with an organization, not like maybe a couple weeks ago, where like the initial ask was like one thing. And then I wrote back with a like, we don't actually do that. It was like a, sponsorship of like a gala. We can't legally do that through the way that we have our foundation set up. So like that was a no. Then it was like, okay, well, what about this? Like, can we bring students in to tour the office? And I like checked with HR and then that was a no. And then it was like, okay, well, what about this? And so like in this one email exchange, I had to tell this person no 4 separate times. And like each time it got a little bit more like, this is you throwing spaghetti at the wall. And like I said, that may be a fundraising strategy, like make the direct ask. But to me, I was like, don't make me say no again. Like, I don't want to do this. I feel like, I don't know. And for me, it would have felt better if it was like, hear you on that. Here are some other opportunities we have. If any of these are interesting now or in the future, please let me know. Link to all of the things. But like, I imagine those no's are those like emotional hits too. And you just made me give you 5 of them in one email exchange over the course of 1 week. That doesn't feel good for anybody. And at some point, I'm just going to stop responding, which like also doesn't feel good too. And so like, I think there's also like nuance to the framing and like, are you setting yourself up for 5 no's in one email thread? Yeah.
Yes. Well, I love that. And I would say that like, I think ghosting is way more dysregulating than no's. And I actually love no's. In fact, inside Power Partners, we have something called the 7-day no challenge. And your goal is to get as many no's as possible. But it's like not through corporate outreach, but because no's are clarity. Like who doesn't want clarity? Who doesn't want things they shouldn't be doing? Who doesn't need a shorter prospect list? Like most people, And so it's like no's are great freaking information. And like they should be honored and embraced and heard. And like any of the fundraising quote unquote strategy that's about overriding the no's, I'm like, how are we saying we want to be committed to like doing better and having boundaries and taking care of ourselves? And then we want to like disregard and, steamroll over other people trying to do that too. And so, no, I love no's. I'm like, thank you for being so clear. Like what a gift. And
maybe
I wish
this person was in your no challenge and was trying to win and was like, I'm gonna get 3 more in this one email.
That's not the challenge. That's not the challenge at all. Not at all. And in fact, like during the challenge, a lot of people like end up raising a lot of money because it's with individual givers, it's like lapsed givers, and it's around this sort of like fun competition. But the point is really to start to have fundraisers think differently about no's, and that one, we can handle it, like you can handle it, fundraisers. And also like they like getting clarity and figuring out clarity around alignment is incredibly important and helpful and something that we want. And so, yeah, I have a very different perspective on no, but I do know rejection can be dysregulating and all the things. Okay. I could talk to you forever. I feel like we dropped some major like inside, behind the scenes look at what is happening on the other end of nonprofits like sending those emails. And I'm so grateful like for your openness and vulnerability and getting into that messy middle with me, because I think that is like what nonprofit, like they needed to hear your heart and your head in what it means to sit on the other side of these things. And so I'm just, thank you for being willing to do this with me.
Yeah, it was fun to join you. It like helps me understand more of how I'm feeling also. I think I came in and really like, feel like I'm sort of carving a lot of this out in a way that feels most authentic to myself and true to the program and the strategy that I'm setting. So your work is so important for fundraisers. And I think I also am like, riding on like the wake of a little bit too, as I really try to figure out like my own way of showing up in this role and thinking about how I like engage in these conversations and partnerships.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.